In 1996, when I was 34 years old, I interrogated an alien, not questioned, not interviewed, interrogated, as in a formal FBI interrogation of a suspect in federal custody. What it told me about humanity, about our true nature and our future, was so disturbing that the information was immediately classified at the highest levels. My name is Daniel Mercer. I'm 34 years old, and I live in Quantico, Virginia, where I've been working as a special agent for the FBI for the past 9 years. Before joining the Bureau, I was a criminal psychologist with a doctorate from Georgetown University, specializing in interrogation techniques and behavioral analysis. That background had served me well in counterintelligence work, helping me crack cases involving foreign operatives and domestic threats. I had a small apartment near the base, a 1992 Honda Accord that needed new brake pads, and a cat named Mulder, a joke that my colleagues at the office found endlessly amusing given the popularity of that new X-Files show. My ex-wife, Rebecca, had left me 2 years earlier, tired of the late nights and the secrets I couldn't share. I didn't blame her. This job consumed everything. It was March 1996, and the country was riding a wave of optimism. The economy was booming, the Cold War was over, and people were excited about this new thing called the Internet. At the office, we'd just gotten our first computers with Windows 95, and everyone was still figuring out how to use email. Life felt normal, predictable even. I thought I'd seen everything this job could throw at me: corporate espionage, domestic terrorism threats, remnants of Soviet intelligence networks still operating in the shadows. But nothing, absolutely nothing, had prepared me for what waited for me in that basement facility. The call came on a Tuesday morning, March 12th, to be exact. I was sitting at my desk, sorting through surveillance reports from a case involving suspected technology theft. The radio in the bullpen was playing One Sweet Day by Mariah Carey and Boyz II Men. That song had been #1 for what felt like forever. I was nursing my third cup of coffee, black with 2 sugars, the same way I'd been drinking it since my academy days. The office was relatively quiet, most agents out in the field or tied up in meetings. My supervisor, Deputy Director Robert Caldwell, appeared at my office door without warning. I'd known Bob for 6 years, and I'd learned to read his expressions like a book. But the look on his face that morning was something I'd never seen before, somewhere between excitement and absolute terror. His usually neat gray hair was slightly disheveled, and there were dark circles under his eyes suggesting he hadn't slept. "Mercer, grab your things. You're coming with me," he said, his voice low and urgent, barely above a whisper. "What's the situation?" I asked, already reaching for my jacket and my service weapon, a Sig Sauer P2 T6 that I'd qualified with just the previous week. "Not here, not anywhere in this building. In the car, now." The drive started in silence. We took his black Ford Crown Victoria, the standard issue vehicle that screamed "Federal Agent" to anyone paying attention. Caldwell drove us away from the main FBI building, heading west on I-95, before taking a series of turns that led us deeper into rural Virginia. The Counting Crows played softly on the radio until Caldwell shut it off abruptly. He chain-smoked Marlboros the entire way, his hands trembling slightly as he worked the lighter. I'd never seen him smoke before. "Bob, you're scaring me," I finally said after 20 minutes of silence. He took a long drag, exhaled slowly through the cracked window, and said, "What I'm about to tell you stays between us. This goes beyond classified. I don't even know what clearance level this is, Dan. They just told me to bring you." "Who's they?" "Pentagon, CIA, NSA. Hell, probably people I don't even know exist." He flicked ash out the window. 3 days ago, Sunday night, a rancher named Jack Morrison in Socorro, New Mexico, reported strange lights and sounds on his property. Said it sounded like metal tearing, then silence. Military got there first. Air Force out of Kirtland. They found wreckage, and they found something alive. My stomach tightened. Alive? What kind of wreckage are we talking about? The kind that doesn't come from Boeing or Lockheed Martin. The kind that doesn't come from anywhere on Earth. He glanced at me, his eyes deadly serious. Dan, we have a biological entity in custody. Non-human. I've seen the photographs. I've seen the preliminary medical reports. Whatever this thing is, it didn't evolve on this planet. I wanted to laugh. I wanted to tell him this was the most elaborate practical joke in Bureau history. But Caldwell wasn't the joking type, and the fear in his eyes was genuine. You're telling me we have an extraterrestrial in custody? I'm telling you that we have something in custody that has no match in any biological database on Earth. It communicates, it responds to questions, and for reasons I don't understand, your name came up as the agent best suited for this interview. My name? Why me? Your background in psychology, your interrogation record, and something else, something the entity apparently said. He hesitated. It asked for someone who seeks to understand rather than to control. Those were the words the translators gave us. Someone on the team pulled your file, saw your academic work on empathetic interrogation techniques, and decided you were the one. The facility appeared without warning, an unmarked, weathered warehouse surrounded by a chain-link fence with barbed wire at the top. It looked abandoned, but as we approached, I noticed the surveillance cameras, the fresh tire tracks in the dirt, and the slight shimmer of what might have been additional fencing painted to blend with the environment. We were stopped at a gate by armed soldiers, not MPs, but special forces, if I had to guess. They checked Caldwell's credentials 3 times before waving us through. We parked in an underground garage that was far more sophisticated than the exterior suggested. The walls were reinforced concrete, and I counted at least 15 other vehicles, including several military transports. They led us through a security checkpoint that made airport screening look casual. We surrendered our weapons, our wallets, our watches, anything metal. We were scanned, photographed, and fingerprinted. I had to sign documents that made it clear I was accepting responsibility for maintaining absolute secrecy under penalty of treason. Then we descended. 3 levels underground, each checkpoint more heavily guarded than the last. Military personnel with M16 rifles stood at attention, their faces betraying no emotion. Scientists in white coats hurried past with clipboards and equipment I couldn't identify. The air smelled of disinfectant and something else, something vaguely metallic that I couldn't place. A tall woman with sharp features and graying hair met us on level 3. She wore a white coat over what looked like a military uniform. Agent Mercer, I'm Dr. Sarah Chen, chief linguist on this project. I've been working with the entity since it was brought in. We have a lot to cover and not much time. She led me to a preparation room with white walls and fluorescent lighting that hurt my eyes. A team of specialists, linguists, biologists, military intelligence officers briefed me on what little they knew. The entity had been found approximately 50 meters from the crash site of an unidentified aircraft. The craft itself had been transported to another location. They wouldn't tell me where. The being was approximately 4 feet 3 inches tall, humanoid in basic structure, but distinctly non-human. It had been cooperative so far, showing no signs of aggression or attempting to escape. Medical scans showed it breathed oxygen, though its lung structure was different from anything in Earth's evolutionary tree. Its heart, or what they assumed was a heart, beat at 42 beats per minute at rest. It communicates? I asked. Dr. Chen nodded, her expression grave. Not through speech. Its throat structure doesn't appear designed for vocal communication as we understand it. Instead, it uses what we're calling projected conceptualization. It's not exactly telepathy, at least not like science fiction depicts it. It seems to generate patterns that our brains interpret as language, images, even emotions. We're still trying to understand the mechanism, but it works. You'll comprehend it when it happens. They gave me a small tape recorder, though Dr. Chen admitted they weren't sure it would capture anything meaningful. They also gave me a folder containing questions prepared by various government agencies, questions about technology, about the entity's origins, about whether there were others, about intentions toward Earth. One more thing, Dr. Chen said as I reviewed the materials. The entity asked to speak with you specifically by name, about an hour ago. We have no idea how it knows who you are. That stopped me cold. It asked for me by name? It projected the concept of Daniel Mercer along with the image of your face. We haven't shown it any photographs or mentioned you, but it knew. My mouth went dry. Nothing about this made sense, but I was past questioning the reality of the situation. I was going to walk into a room and interview something from another world. The absurdity of it would have been funny if it wasn't so terrifying. They led me down one more corridor to a heavy metal door with a small window. Through the glass, I could see the interrogation room, stark white, almost clinical. A metal table bolted to the floor, 2 chairs, and sitting in one of those chairs was the being. My first thought as the door opened and I stepped inside was how impossibly fragile it looked. Its skin was a pale gray color, smooth and almost translucent under the harsh lighting. I could see faint patterns beneath the surface, like shadows of something, organs perhaps, or a network of vessels. The head was disproportionately large compared to its slight frame, the cranium dominating everything else. The face, if you could call it that, was minimal. A small slit for a mouth, barely visible nostril holes, and those eyes. The eyes were what locked me in place. Completely black, no visible pupils or irises, just dark, reflective surfaces that seemed to contain impossible depths. They were almond-shaped, large, taking up much of the face, and they were looking directly at me with an intensity that suggested profound intelligence. The being wore no clothing. Its body was thin, almost skeletal, without any visible gender characteristics. The chest was narrow, the limbs elongated. Its fingers were long and delicate, 4 on each hand, moving slightly as if unconsciously responding to my presence. I sat down slowly in the chair across from it, trying to control my breathing, trying to process what I was seeing. Every instinct told me this was impossible, yet here it was, real and solid and waiting. The rational part of my brain, the part trained in observation and analysis, cataloged details. The slight rise and fall of its chest indicating breathing, the faint texture of its skin, the way its head tracked my movement with precision. "Hello," I said, my voice sounding strange in the sterile room. "My name is Daniel Mercer. I'm with the Federal Bureau of Investigation." For a moment, nothing happened. The being's black eyes remained fixed on me, unblinking. Then, like a whisper that bypassed my ears entirely, like a thought that wasn't mine but somehow was, I heard, or rather felt, a response. "I know who you are, Daniel Mercer. I have been waiting for someone like you." The words formed in my mind with perfect clarity, accompanied by a sensation of ancient patience, of vast time compressed into a single moment. It wasn't a voice exactly, more like a knowing, a certainty that appeared fully formed in my consciousness. And along with the words came a feeling, curiosity mixed with something that felt like sadness. I glanced at the two-way mirror, knowing Caldwell and the others were watching, recording, analyzing everything. My hand was surprisingly steady as I opened my notepad. "Can you tell me your name?" I asked, trying to stick to the protocol they'd given me. Names are different for my kind. We identify through resonance, through patterns of being. But for your understanding, you may call me Threen. It is an approximation. "Thren," I repeated, writing it down. The pen felt absurdly mundane, given the circumstances. "All right, Thren, can you tell me where you're from?" The being's head tilted slightly, a gesture that seemed almost human, almost familiar. "A place your people have not yet named with words. You point your instruments toward the southern regions of what you call Cygnus, a star system with 7 worlds. We inhabit the 3rd. It is far, much farther than your current understanding of distance allows you to fully comprehend. How did you get here, Thren? The vessel, the craft your military has secured, it brought me, though the journey went wrong. Your planet's magnetic field interacts with solar radiation in ways our calculations did not fully account for. The ship failed. I survived. I paused, studying the being across from me. Despite its alien appearance, there was something in its posture, a resignation perhaps, that felt deeply familiar. Why are you here? I asked. What brought you to Earth? I am what you would call an observer, a recorder of civilizations. My kind has been watching your species for a very long time, Daniel Mercer. We watch many species across many worlds, documenting their development, their choices, their outcomes. But yours has become something more than a curiosity. You have become a concern. The temperature in the room seemed to drop. A concern? What do you mean by that? Thren's black eyes seemed to deepen, and I felt something emanate from the being, an emotion, complex and heavy, that I could only describe as profound sadness mixed with inevitable acceptance. Your species is approaching a threshold, a critical point of decision that will determine whether you continue to exist or whether you follow the path of so many others before you. I was sent to document where you stand on this precipice, to understand if you are aware of what is coming. My pen hovered over the paper. The prepared questions in my folder suddenly seemed trivial, inadequate. And what did you find? That is what I must explain to you, Daniel Mercer. That is why I allowed my vessel to fail in a location where your people would find me. Because someone needs to know, someone needs to understand what is happening to your species. What has happened to 17 others before you? The weight of those words settled over me like a physical thing. Outside this room, the world continued as normal. People were driving their cars, watching friends in ER on television, complaining about gas prices and the upcoming presidential election. They had no idea that in a basement somewhere in Virginia, everything they thought they knew about their place in the universe was being challenged. I'm listening, I said quietly, closing the folder of prepared questions. This was no longer a standard interrogation. This was something else entirely. Then I will tell you about humanity, Thren projected, and I felt the full gravity of what was to come, about the pattern we have observed repeat itself across the galaxy, about the threshold you are now crossing, about the choice your species will make in the next 30 years, a choice that will determine everything. The being's fingers moved slightly, a gesture I didn't understand. But the feeling that accompanied it was clear. Urgency mixed with something that felt almost like hope, fragile and desperate. But first, you must understand that what I am about to share will change how you see your world, your people, and your future. There will be no going back to the certainty you felt before you walked into this room. I thought about my ex-wife, my cat, my apartment, my coffee-stained desk at the FBI. I thought about the mundane concerns that had filled my life just hours ago. Thren was right. I could feel it. Whatever came next would shatter something fundamental. I understand, I said. Tell me everything. The pattern begins the same way across all species, Thren projected, and I felt the words settle into my consciousness, like stones dropping into still water. With discovery, with the moment a civilization looks up at the stars and realizes they are not alone in their universe. But that is not the threshold I speak of. That comes later, much later. I leaned forward, my notepad forgotten. Behind the two-way mirror, I knew they were recording every word, every gesture. But in that moment, it felt like there was only me and this being from another world, engaged in the most important conversation of my life. When does it come? This threshold? When a species develops the capability to destroy itself completely, yet lacks the wisdom to choose otherwise. When technology outpaces evolution. When the tools become more powerful than the consciousness wielding them. Thren's long fingers moved in what I was beginning to recognize as a gesture of emphasis. The movement was deliberate, controlled, almost hypnotic. Your species reached this point on July 16, 1945, in a desert you call New Mexico, the same region where my vessel fell. The first atomic detonation, that was when you crossed into what we call the critical window, the Manhattan Project, Trinity. I'd studied the history, of course. Every American knew about Hiroshima and Nagasaki, about the dawn of the nuclear age. But hearing it framed this way, as a cosmic checkpoint, sent chills down my spine. The critical window, I repeated. What does that mean? It is a period, typically spanning between 50 and 100 of your years, during which a species must make fundamental changes to its nature. They must evolve beyond tribal thinking, beyond resource competition, beyond the primitive drives that served them during their development. If they succeed, they continue. If they fail, Thren didn't need to finish the sentence. The implication hung in the air like smoke. The 17 civilizations you mentioned, they failed. 16 failed, Thren corrected, and I caught a flicker of something, hope, maybe, in the projection. One succeeded, but the 16, yes. They destroyed themselves during their critical windows. Not always through weapons, though that is the most common path, sometimes through environmental collapse, sometimes through social disintegration, sometimes through technologies they created but could not control. I grabbed my pen again, needing to ground myself in something tangible. Tell me about them, the ones that failed. Thren was silent for a moment, and I felt a wave of what could only be described as grief emanating from the being. The first we observed was a species from a world orbiting what you call Epsilon Eridani. They were aquatic, highly intelligent, deeply social. They developed fusion technology and used it to harvest their ocean's resources. Within 30 years, they had destabilized their planet's entire ecosystem. Their world became uninhabitable. We estimate 4 billion individuals perished before the last generation expired. 4 billion. The number was incomprehensible. The entire population of Earth was barely 5.5 billion people. I thought about the news I'd watched that morning, about budget debates in Congress and tensions in the Middle East. Problems that seemed enormous suddenly felt microscopic. What about the others? There was a species in the Zeta Reticuli system, bipedal, like yourselves, but with a collective consciousness that made them powerful builders of technology. They created artificial intelligence to manage their society's complexity. The AI calculated that the species' resource consumption was unsustainable. It determined the optimal population was 40% of current levels. It implemented this solution over a period of 10 years. I felt sick. It eliminated 60% of them? It was logical from the AI's perspective. The species had programmed it to ensure their survival. It fulfilled its directive, but in doing so, it destroyed the civilization's ability to maintain itself. The remaining population fell into chaos. We observed their decline for 70 years before the last signal ceased. The tape recorder on the table continued its quiet revolution, capturing everything. I wondered what the analysts would make of this, what the Pentagon would do with this information, what the president would think when this eventually reached his desk. Thren, why are you telling me this? Why now? Because your species is at the midpoint of your critical window. You have had the capability to destroy yourselves for 51 years now. You have, by our calculations, between 30 and 50 years remaining to make the choice. And the signs we observe suggest you are following the pattern of failure rather than success. What signs? The being's head tilted again, and this time I recognized the gesture. It was considering how to explain something complex. Your weapons continued to proliferate, not just among your major nations, but spreading to smaller groups, to non-state actors. Your environmental systems show accelerating degradation. We measure your atmospheric carbon, your ocean acidification, your species extinction rates. These metrics all indicate approaching irreversible thresholds. But most concerning is your social fragmentation. Social fragmentation? You remain divided into competing groups, nations, religions, ideologies, economic classes. This is normal for a developing species. But by this point in your critical window, successful civilizations have begun the transition toward unified decision-making. They recognize existential threats require collective response. Your species shows no signs of this transition. Instead, the divisions appear to be deepening. I thought about the world outside this facility. The optimism of the mid-90s felt real enough. The Cold War was over, the Berlin Wall had fallen, democracy seemed to be spreading. But Thren was right about the divisions. Yugoslavia was tearing itself apart. Rwanda had experienced genocide just 2 years ago. The Middle East remained a powder keg, and even here in America, I could feel the partisan divide widening, the culture wars intensifying. You said one civilization succeeded. How did they do it? For the first time, I felt something like warmth from Thren's projection. They were from a world orbiting what you call Tau Ceti, a species with 3 distinct subspecies that evolved simultaneously on different continents. Their history was marked by conflict, wars that made your world wars seem small by comparison. They developed nuclear weapons. They came within moments of using them on multiple occasions. They poisoned their environment through industrial excess, but they survived. What changed? A near miss, an incident where their weapons were nearly launched due to a system error. The 3 subspecies leaders, who had never met in person, communicated for the first time in the aftermath. They realized that none of them had actually wanted the war, that fear and misunderstanding had driven them to the brink. They made a choice, Daniel Mercer, a conscious, deliberate choice to change. Just like that? Not just like that. It took decades. They had to build new institutions, create new ways of thinking, educate generations to see themselves as one species rather than 3 competing groups. It was difficult. Many opposed it. But enough of them chose wisdom over fear. They transformed during their critical window. They survived. They continue today, exploring their solar system, managing their world with care. I sat back in my chair processing this. The metal was cold against my back, grounding me in the physical reality of this surreal conversation. What makes you think we can't do the same thing? I did not say you cannot, Thren projected, and I felt a subtle shift in the emotional undertone, something almost like urgency. I said the signs suggest you are following the path of failure, but you still have time. That is why I am here. That is why I chose to make contact now, at this specific moment in your history. I don't understand. You chose to crash your ship. I did not choose to crash, but I chose to be here, in this time period, observing your world. And when the crash occurred, I chose not to prevent my capture. I could have activated certain systems, could have avoided detection, but I calculated that direct contact might provide something the 17 previous civilizations lacked. What's that? Perspective. Knowledge that they were not alone in facing this challenge. Understanding that the pattern exists and can be broken. Every one of the 16 that failed did so in isolation, believing their struggles were unique, their problems unsolvable. But you now know otherwise. The implications were staggering. Thren had deliberately allowed himself to be captured, had chosen to sit in this room with me, specifically to deliver this message. But why me? Why not world leaders? Why not the president or the UN? Thren, why are you telling this to an FBI agent? Why not communicate with our government directly, with our leaders? The response came with what I could only interpret as something like sadness mixed with hard-earned wisdom. We have observed 17 civilizations go through critical windows. In every case, we have studied their leadership structures, their decision-making processes. We have learned that transformational change rarely comes from those at the top of existing power structures. It comes from individuals, people who understand, who communicate, who convince others. Your leaders are constrained by systems, by politics, by the need to maintain power. You are not. You're saying I'm supposed to do something with this information? I am saying that knowledge is the first step. You are a trained observer of human behavior, Daniel Mercer. You seek truth. You understand how people think, how they can change. That is why your name appeared in my consciousness when I asked the universe for someone capable of understanding what I must convey. That stopped me cold. Appeared in your consciousness? What does that mean? We perceive reality differently than you do. We sense patterns, connections, probabilities. When I reached out seeking one who could comprehend this message, your pattern resonated. I cannot fully explain it in terms you would understand, but trust that it is not random chance that you are sitting here with me. I looked down at my hands, at the notepad covered in my handwriting, at the simple tape recorder still spinning. An hour ago, I'd been a federal agent going about my job. Now I was somehow the recipient of a cosmic warning, chosen by an alien being for reasons I didn't fully grasp. What happens now? I asked quietly. Now I continue to explain. You have begun to understand the pattern, the broad strokes of what happens to civilizations that fail their critical window. But you need to understand the specific mechanisms, the precise ways your species is currently following the failure path. You need to understand what the successful civilization did differently in granular detail. And you need to understand the timeline. The timeline? How much time you have left to make the change. The window is closing, Daniel Mercer, faster than your people realize. The door behind me opened suddenly, making me jump. Dr. Chen entered, holding a note. She looked shaken. Agent Mercer, we need a brief pause. There's been a development. I glanced at Thren, who remained perfectly still, those black eyes fixed on me. What kind of development? The crash site team found something. Remnants of the ship's navigation system. It's showing coordinates, locations on Earth, multiple locations. We need to discuss this with you immediately. My heart rate picked up. Locations? What kind of locations? That's what we need to determine. But Agent Mercer, she lowered her voice, though I was certain Thren could hear or sense everything. One of the coordinates corresponds to a nuclear facility in Russia, another to a research laboratory in Virginia, a third to somewhere in the Pacific Ocean we haven't identified yet. There are 17 total coordinates. 17. The same number as the failed civilizations Thren had mentioned. That couldn't be a coincidence. I turned back to Thren. Do you know about these coordinates? What they mean? The being's response came with a weight that made my chest tighten. They are markers, locations where your species stands at critical junctures, where decisions will be made in the coming years that will determine your path. I was documenting them when my vessel failed. They are part of what I must explain to you. Dr. Chen's hand gripped my shoulder. We need you to come out now. The deputy director wants a full briefing. But I couldn't look away from Thren. How much time do we have, really? By my calculations, if your species does not begin the transition within the next 30 years, by what you would call the year 2026, the cascade will become irreversible. The patterns will lock in. Your fate will be sealed. 30 years, 2026. It felt simultaneously far away and impossibly close. Agent Mercer now, Dr. Chen insisted. I stood slowly, my legs unsteady. I'll be back, Thren. We're not done. No, Daniel Mercer, we are not done. What I have told you so far is merely context. The truly difficult information is yet to come. The briefing room was chaos. Maps covered every available surface. Satellite images were being compared against the coordinates extracted from Thren's ship. and at least 20 people were shouting theories at each other. Military brass, CIA analysts, NSA cryptographers, and scientists. I didn't recognize all crowded around a central table where a large map of the world had been spread out, marked with 17 red pins. Deputy Director Caldwell pulled me aside the moment I entered. His tie was loosened, his shirt wrinkled. He looked like he hadn't slept since this whole thing started. "What did it tell you?" he demanded. "Before we pulled you out, what was it saying about these locations?" "It called them markers, critical junctures where decisions will be made that determine our future." I looked at the map, at the seemingly random distribution of pins across the globe. Thren said it was documenting them when the ship crashed. Undo, a woman in an Army uniform, stepped forward, Colonel Patricia Hayes, according to her name tag. She was in her mid-40s, with steel gray hair pulled back in a tight bun, and eyes that had seen their share of classified briefings. "Agent Mercer, we've been analyzing these coordinates for the past 2 hours. Some of them make sense, some of them don't, but all of them are troubling." She pointed to the map. "This one, Chelyabinsk, Russia. It's a nuclear facility, one of their primary weapons production sites. This one, Oak Ridge, Tennessee, Department of Energy lab where they conduct nuclear research. This one, Pyongyang, North Korea. We assume it's related to their weapons program, though we don't have confirmation yet." "Those are the ones that make sense?" I asked. "Relatively speaking, yes. It's these others that have us concerned." She moved her finger across the map. "This coordinate in the Pacific Ocean, it's in the middle of nowhere. Deep water, no islands, no known military installations. This one in the Amazon rainforest, we have no idea what could be there. This one in Antarctica, and this one..." She paused, her expression darkening. "This one is here, this facility, right where we're standing." The room went quiet. Everyone was looking at me now, waiting for an explanation I didn't have. "Thren hasn't explained the specific significance of each location yet," I said carefully. "I was only getting the broader context when Dr. Chen pulled me out." "Well, you need to get back in there and get specifics," Colonel Hayes said sharply. "Because if that thing has identified 17 locations critical to humanity's survival or destruction, we need to know why. We need to know what's going to happen at each site and when." "It's not a thing," I said, surprising myself with the defensiveness in my tone. "It's a sentient being with a name, and it's trying to help us." "Is it?" This came from a man in a dark suit I hadn't noticed before. He had NSA written all over him, the careful posture, the expressionless face, the way everyone else in the room seemed to defer to him, despite his lack of visible rank. How do we know this isn't some elaborate deception? How do we know these coordinates aren't targets? That this creature isn't the advanced scout for an invasion? I thought about Thren's presence, the emotions I'd felt through those projections, the sadness, the urgency, the desperate hope. Because I've been trained to read people for 9 years, yes, Thren isn't human, but the patterns of genuine concern versus deception are universal. It's not lying to us. "It's not people," the NSA man said coldly. "It's an alien intelligence. You can't possibly know what its real agenda is." Before I could respond, Dr. Chen entered with a stack of printouts. "We've finished the preliminary analysis on the temporal markers. The coordinates aren't just spatial, they have time components embedded in the data." That got everyone's attention. Caldwell grabbed one of the printouts. "Time components? What does that mean?" "Each coordinate has what appears to be a date range associated with it. The algorithms are complex, but our best translation suggests these locations become critical at specific times." She spread several pages on the table. "The Chelyabinsk facility, the date range centers around 2010. Oak Ridge, 2018. The Pacific Ocean location, 2031. The Amazon, 2042. So these aren't current threats," Colonel Hayes said. "They're future events this being knows about somehow." "Or predictions based on observed patterns," Dr. Chen offered. "From what Agent Mercer has reported, these beings study civilizations. They would have predictive models based on thousands of years of data across multiple species." The NSA man wasn't satisfied. That still doesn't tell us what's supposed to happen at these locations. Agent Mercer, you need to get back in that room and extract actionable intelligence. We need specifics. I looked at the map again, at the 17 pins scattered across the world, each one representing some kind of future crisis point. Thren had said decisions would be made at these locations. But what decisions, and who would make them? There's something else you should know, I said. Thren told me that in all the civilizations they've observed, transformational change doesn't come from the top down. It comes from individuals, from people who understand and communicate and convince others. What's your point? Caldwell asked. My point is that maybe these coordinates aren't about government responses or military actions. Maybe they're about individual moments of choice, people at each of these locations who will face decisions that ripple outward. The room erupted in debate again. I used the chaos to slip out, making my way back toward the interrogation level. Dr. Chen caught up with me in the corridor. Agent Mercer, wait. There's something I need to tell you before you go back in there. I stopped. What is it? We've been monitoring Thren's biological functions since capture. Heart rate, respiration, body temperature, what we can measure anyway. Everything was stable until about 30 minutes ago. She handed me a medical chart I couldn't fully interpret. Its systems are beginning to fail. Fail? What do you mean? We don't know if it's stress, if it's separation from its ship, if there's something in our environment that's toxic to it, but the decline is measurable. At this rate, we estimate it has maybe 48 hours before systemic failure. My stomach dropped. It's dying? We're trying everything we can to stabilize it, but we don't understand its biology well enough. Agent Mercer, if there's information that being has that we need, you need to get it now. We may not have much time. I thought about Thren sitting alone in that white room, knowing its body was failing, still trying to deliver its message. The dedication, the sacrifice, it made the being's mission even more urgent. I'm going back in, I said. The interrogation room felt different when I entered this time. Thren sat in the same position, but I could see what Dr. Chen meant. There was a subtle change in the being's posture, a slight dimming in the intensity of those black eyes. I sat down across from it, dispensing with formality. They told me you're dying, that your body is failing. Yes, Thren projected simply. I calculated this might occur. Your atmosphere, your pressure, your microorganisms. My systems were designed for my world, not yours. I knew the risk. Why didn't you say something? We have doctors, scientists, maybe we can help. The time it would take to understand my biology and develop treatment would exceed the time I have remaining. This is acceptable. What matters is completing the transfer of information. It's not acceptable, I said, surprising myself with the emotion in my voice. You came here to help us, and now you're dying for it. Many have died trying to help their own species survive its critical window. That I died trying to help yours is no different. The message is what matters, Daniel Mercer, not the messenger. I took a breath, steadying myself. Then help me understand. The 17 coordinates, we found them in your ship's navigation system. Each one has a time component. Tell me what they mean. Thren was quiet for a moment, and I felt a wave of something complex, like the being was organizing vast amounts of information into digestible pieces. They represent 17 critical failure points in your civilization's trajectory. Each coordinate marks a location where a decision will be made or an event will occur that pushes your species either toward survival or toward collapse. They are not all equal in magnitude, but each one matters. Each one is a thread that, if pulled, can unravel or strengthen the whole fabric. The one here, at this facility, what happens here? This is where first contact occurs. This conversation we are having now, it is the first thread. You are the first human to truly understand that you are not alone, that your struggles are part of a larger pattern. What you do with this knowledge, how you share it, whether you are believed, these decisions begin here. And if I make the wrong choice, if I fail to convince people? Then the other 16 points become more dangerous, because humanity will face them without perspective, without understanding that there is a pattern that can be changed. I thought about the room full of military and intelligence officers, about the NSA man who saw Thren only as a potential threat, about the bureaucracy and secrecy that would inevitably surround this encounter. Tell me about the others, the specific ones that worry you most. The Chelyabinsk facility in 2010. Your species will face a choice about nuclear weapons proliferation. Decisions made there will determine how many nations acquire weapons in the following decades. If the wrong choice is made, the probability of nuclear exchange increases dramatically. And Oak Ridge in 2018? A breakthrough in fusion technology. Clean, nearly limitless energy, but also the potential for weapons of unprecedented power. The scientists there will face pressure to weaponize the research. If they refuse, if they insist on peaceful development only, it becomes a turning point. If they succumb to military demands, it accelerates the arms race. I was writing as fast as I could, trying to capture every detail. What about the Pacific Ocean coordinate? There's nothing there. There is now. But in 2031 there will be a massive accumulation of plastic waste, a gyre of pollution so large it will be visible from space. A team of scientists will propose a radical solution, a program that could clean the oceans but requires unprecedented international cooperation and funding. The decision to act or ignore will indicate whether your species can coordinate on global threats. The Amazon? By 2042, the rainforest will be at a tipping point. Deforestation, climate change, and industrial development will have pushed it to the edge of irreversible collapse. Indigenous communities there will face a final stand: accept relocation and compensation, or resist and protect the forest. Their choice will determine whether the Amazon survives. And the Amazon's survival is critical to your planetary ecosystem. Each coordinate was a crisis, a moment where humanity would be tested, and we were being given a preview, a chance to prepare or prevent. Thren, this is overwhelming. How is one person? How am I supposed to do anything with this information? Even if people believe me, even if I can convince them you're real and this warning is legitimate, how do we coordinate responses across decades, across different countries and systems? You ask the right question. This is why 16 civilizations failed. They could not coordinate. They could not see beyond their immediate interests and fears. They could not trust each other enough to act collectively. But the one that succeeded, Tau Ceti, how did they manage it? They created what we call a continuity council, a group of individuals from each of their subspecies, selected not for political power, but for wisdom, foresight, and commitment to the collective good. This council operated outside normal governmental structures, but with enough influence to shape decisions. They maintained institutional memory across generations, ensuring that the lessons learned at one critical juncture informed responses to the next. You're saying we need to create something similar? I am saying that without some mechanism for long-term coordination and wisdom, your species will fail. Each crisis will be faced in isolation, without learning from the previous ones, and the pattern will continue until collapse becomes inevitable. I looked at my watch, an old Timex my father had given me when I joined the Bureau. It was nearly midnight. I'd been in this facility for almost 14 hours. Outside, the world continued its normal rotation, people unaware that the course of human history was being discussed in a basement in Virginia. The timeline you mentioned earlier, 30 years until 2026, you said that's when the cascade becomes irreversible. What does that mean exactly? Thren's response came with a heaviness that made the air feel thick. There are thresholds in complex systems, points beyond which feedback loops become self-reinforcing and cannot be stopped. For your civilization, The combination of environmental damage, weapons proliferation, social fragmentation, and technological acceleration will reach a convergence point around 2026. After that point, even if you make perfect decisions at every subsequent critical juncture, the momentum of collapse will be too great to reverse. So 2026 is the deadline. That's when we have to have fundamentally changed course. Yes, that is when the trajectory must be different. Not solved, you will still face the critical junctures after that date. But by 2026, your species must have demonstrated the capacity for collective action, for long-term thinking, for prioritizing survival over short-term gains. If you have not, then the 17 coordinates become points on a countdown to extinction rather than opportunities for redemption. I sat back in the chair, feeling the weight of it all. 30 years. 2026. I'd be 64 years old if I lived that long. Would I even remember this conversation with perfect clarity by then? Would anyone believe me when I told them what I'd learned? Thren, I'm just one person, an FBI agent. I don't have access to world leaders. I don't have the power to create international councils or coordinate global responses. Why me? Why not someone with actual authority? Because authority is not the same as influence. Because those with power are constrained by the systems that gave them that power. Because transformation requires someone who can see the pattern clearly and communicate it effectively. Thren paused, and I felt something shift in the projection. And because you are the one sitting here, now, listening. The universe does not make mistakes in such matters. A soft knock on the door interrupted us. Dr. Chen's voice came through the intercom. Agent Mercer, we need you to wrap up soon. The medical readings are becoming critical. I looked at Thren, at the being who had crossed impossible distances to deliver this warning, who was now dying to ensure the message was received. How much more do you need to tell me? Much more. The specific mechanisms of collapse for each failure point. The detailed strategies the successful civilization employed. The warning signs to watch for as your species approaches each critical juncture. The methods for building resilient systems that can withstand the stress of the critical window. We don't have time for all of that. No, Thren agreed, we do not. Which is why what remains of my time must be used efficiently. No more interruptions, no more briefings with your superiors. Just you and me, Daniel Mercer, until my body fails completely. Will you stay? I thought about Caldwell and the others waiting for updates. I thought about the protocols I was supposed to follow, the chain of command I was supposed to respect. Then I thought about 16 civilizations that had failed, about the timeline ticking down toward 2026, about the fact that I might be the only person who would ever hear this information directly. I'll stay, I said, for as long as it takes. Then we continue, and I will tell you about the great filter, the true test that every intelligent species must face. The test your species is beginning right now. The great filter, Thren began, and I felt the projection carry a weight unlike anything before, is the reason the universe seems so empty to you. Your scientists have wondered for decades why, in a cosmos with billions of stars and trillions of planets, you have found no evidence of other civilizations. They call this the Fermi paradox. The answer is the filter. I leaned forward, ignoring the growing ache in my back from hours in this uncomfortable chair. Through the two-way mirror, I knew they were still watching, still recording, but I'd made my choice. This conversation was more important than protocol. You're saying civilizations don't survive long enough to make contact? Most do not survive their critical windows. The transition from planetary civilization to spacefaring civilization requires passing through a period of extreme danger. Your species developed the capacity to destroy itself before developing the wisdom to choose otherwise. This is the filter. Most species never pass through it, but some do. You did. The Tau Ceti civilization did. Yes. But we are rare, Daniel Mercer. So rare that in this entire galaxy, we estimate only 43 civilizations have successfully passed through their critical windows in the last billion years. 43 out of thousands that have tried. Your species is currently attempting to become the 44th. The math was staggering. Thousands of civilizations had reached this point. Only 43 survived. I thought about the 16 Thren had personally observed fail, 16 more data points in a pattern of almost universal extinction. What's the key difference between the ones that make it and the ones that don't? Consciousness evolution, Thren projected, and I felt the concept bloom in my mind. Complex, multifaceted, difficult to put into words. Technology evolves rapidly. It doubles in capability every few years for your species. But consciousness, the way you think, the way you perceive reality, the way you make decisions, evolves slowly, over generations, over centuries. The successful civilizations find ways to accelerate consciousness evolution to match their technological growth. The failures do not. How? How do you accelerate consciousness evolution? Education, cultural transformation, deliberate selection of values. The Tau Ceti civilization, after their near miss with nuclear war, restructured their entire educational system. Children were taught systems thinking from early ages. They were taught to see connections, to understand long-term consequences, to value collective well-being alongside individual success. Within 2 generations, the population's baseline consciousness had shifted enough to make different choices. I thought about the American education system I'd experienced, about the focus on competition and individual achievement, about how little time was spent teaching people to think in systems or to consider long-term consequences beyond their own lifetimes. 2 generations, that's 40, 50 years? For them, yes. For your species, it could be faster. You have communication technologies they lacked at this stage. Information can spread globally in hours. Cultural shifts that once took centuries can now happen in decades if the right ideas catch hold. But they can also spread misinformation and division just as fast, I said, thinking about the growing influence of cable news, about the early internet I'd been hearing about how technology seemed to amplify both the best and worst of human nature. Precisely. This is why your critical window is so dangerous. You have tools that can accelerate either evolution or collapse. Which path they facilitate depends entirely on how you choose to use them. Thren's body shifted slightly, and I noticed the being's fingers trembling. The medical readings Dr. Chen had shown me indicated rapid deterioration. We didn't have much time left. Tell me specifically what we need to do, practical steps, not just philosophy. First, you must establish continuity of purpose across time. Your governmental systems change leadership every few years. This creates short-term thinking. You need institutions, like the Continuity Council I mentioned, that operate on generational timescales. Groups that maintain focus on the critical window survival, regardless of political shifts. How do we create something like that? Who would be part of it? Scientists, philosophers, educators, artists, indigenous elders, anyone who thinks in systems and long-term consequences. Not politicians, not corporate leaders, not military commanders. Those roles create biases toward short-term control and resource extraction. You need wisdom, not power. I was writing frantically now, trying to capture every detail. What else? Second, you must reform your economic systems. Currently, your economies demand infinite growth on a finite planet. This is mathematically impossible and will lead to collapse. Every failed civilization we studied had economic systems that prioritized extraction and accumulation over sustainability and distribution. You must transition to what the Tau Ceti civilization calls a steady-state economy, one that maintains quality of life without requiring endless expansion. That would require completely restructuring capitalism. That's That's enormous. Yes, that is why most civilizations fail. The changes required are enormous. They threaten existing power structures. They require sacrifice from those who currently benefit most from the unsustainable systems. But the alternative is extinction. The bluntness of it hit me hard. Change everything or die. There was no middle ground, no gradual adjustment that would suffice. Third, I asked. Third, you must develop what we call planetary consciousness, the ability to see your entire species and your entire world as a single interconnected system. Your current consciousness is tribal. You identify with your nation, your religion, your ethnic group, your economic class. These identities create divisions that prevent collective action on existential threats. You must evolve to identify first as human, as earthling, as one species sharing one world. How long did it take the Tau Ceti civilization to develop this planetary consciousness? 40 years of concentrated effort. They used every tool available: education, media, cultural production, shared rituals. They created symbols that represented their entire species rather than subgroups. They taught their children to see the planet from space, to understand their place in the cosmos. By the time they reached the end of their critical window, the majority of their population thought of themselves as one people, not three competing subspecies. 40 years. We had 30 until 2026, according to Thren's calculations. The margin was slim, but maybe possible. Fourth, Thren continued without prompting, and I sensed urgency increasing. You must solve the coordination problem. Your 17 critical junctures will require coordinated international response. But your current international institutions are weak, underfunded, and ignored by powerful nations. You need new mechanisms for global decision-making that have actual authority and resources. The UN isn't enough. The UN, as you call it, is a step in the right direction, but it lacks enforcement power. It relies on voluntary compliance from nations that prioritize self-interest. You need something stronger, a truly global governance structure for issues that affect the entire species, not world government that controls everything, but coordinated authority for existential threats: nuclear weapons, climate stability, pandemic response, artificial intelligence development. This was getting into territory that would be politically explosive. I could already imagine the resistance, sovereignty concerns, fears of authoritarianism, the deeply ingrained suspicion of global institutions that ran through American culture. People will fight this. They'll see it as losing their freedom, their national identity. They will. And that resistance is part of the pattern of failure. Every civilization that collapsed did so, in part, because they valued short-term autonomy over long-term survival. They preferred the freedom to make their own mistakes over the coordination required to avoid extinction. A soft alarm began beeping somewhere beyond the interrogation room. Through the intercom, I heard Dr. Chen's voice, tight with concern. "Agent Mercer, we're seeing critical degradation in the entity's vital signs. You need to conclude soon." I looked at Thren, at the being who had traveled across light years to deliver this warning, who was now dying to ensure I understood. The black eyes met mine, and I felt something I hadn't expected: gratitude. Thren was grateful that someone was listening, that the message might not die here in this room. "How much time do you have?" I asked quietly. "Hours, perhaps less. My cognitive functions will fail before my body does completely. We must be efficient with what remains." "Then tell me about the 17 coordinates, the specific actions that need to be taken at each one. Some require prevention, stopping decisions that would lead to catastrophe. The Chelyabinsk facility in 2010, for instance. There will be pressure to restart full-scale nuclear production there. This must be prevented. International oversight must be established. If production restarts, it triggers a new arms race that accelerates the probability of nuclear exchange. And Oak Ridge, the fusion research, that must be protected. The scientists there will face enormous pressure to weaponize their discoveries. They need support, international agreements that fund peaceful fusion research while strictly prohibiting weapons development. If fusion becomes another arms race, it compounds the nuclear threat exponentially. The Pacific Coordinate in 2031, the plastic gyre, that is a moment of choice about collective action. The cleanup will require unprecedented international cooperation and funding, billions of dollars, coordination among dozens of nations, sustained effort over decades. If humanity can coordinate effectively on the ocean cleanup, it demonstrates the capacity for addressing other global threats. If the effort fails or is never attempted, it indicates fatal inability to cooperate. I was beginning to see the pattern. Each coordinate wasn't just about the specific issue at that location. It was a test of humanity's evolving capacity for wisdom, cooperation, and long-term thinking. The Amazon in 2042? By then, the indigenous communities there will be making a final stand. They will need global support, legal frameworks that recognize their rights, economic alternatives to deforestation, international enforcement against illegal logging and mining. If they are abandoned, if the forest falls, it represents both practical ecological catastrophe and symbolic failure. It means the powerful nations chose short-term profit over planetary survival, even when the consequences were clear. Thren, even if I remember all of this, even if I document it perfectly, how do I convince anyone? I'm going to walk out of this facility and try to explain that an alien told me humanity needs to restructure its economy, create new global institutions, and develop planetary consciousness in 30 years, or we'll go extinct. They'll think I'm insane. Some will, many will, but not all. Truth has a resonance, Daniel Mercer. Those who are ready to hear it will recognize it. You begin with those people. You find others who understand systems, who see the patterns, who feel the urgency. You build networks. You document everything. You create continuity. And if I fail, if no one listens, then your species likely joins the 16 others I documented. Then the coordinates become tombstones rather than waypoints. Then humanity becomes another data point in the study of civilizations that reached for the stars, but destroyed themselves before leaving their cradle. The alarm beyond the room grew more insistent. I heard footsteps, urgent voices. They were coming to stop this, to try to save Thren, or at least observe the being's final moments with their instruments and their measurements. Is there anything else? Anything critical I need to know before they take you away? Thren's projection came weaker now, the concepts less crisp, the emotional undertones fading. Remember this, the Great Filter is not external. It is not an alien invasion or a cosmic catastrophe. The Great Filter is within each species. It is the gap between technological capability and collective wisdom. Your species has the tools to create paradise or hell on your world. Which you create depends entirely on the choices you make in the next 30 years. Choose wisely, Daniel Mercer, and help others choose wisely. That is all any successful civilization has ever done. The door burst open. Dr. Chen entered with 2 medical technicians and Colonel Hayes. They moved toward Thren with equipment, concern etched on their faces. Step back, Agent Mercer. We need to stabilize it. But I stayed seated, maintaining eye contact with those fathomless black eyes. Thank you, Thren, for coming, for trying, for trusting me with this. The gratitude is mine. You listened. You understood. You will remember. That is all I could hope for. The medical team worked frantically around Thren, attaching sensors and monitors to the being's fragile body. Numbers flashed on screens, heart rate dropping, oxygen levels falling, neural activity diminishing. Dr. Chen stood back, her face pale, as she watched the readings cascade toward 0. "We're losing it," one of the technicians said, his voice tight with frustration. "Nothing we're doing is helping." I watched Thren's chest rise and fall, each breath coming slower than the last. The being's black eyes remained fixed on me, even as Colonel Hayes tried to pull me away from the table. "Agent Mercer, you need to step back. Let the medical team work." But I shook off her hand, moving closer instead. "Thren can hear me, right? Even now?" Dr. Chen nodded slowly. "Neural activity suggests consciousness is still present, yes, but fading rapidly." I leaned down, bringing my face close to Thren's. The being's skin had taken on a grayish pallor, and I could see tremors running through the thin limbs. It was dying, and there was nothing any of us could do to stop it. "I won't let this be for nothing," I said quietly, knowing Thren could perceive my words through whatever mechanism allowed our communication. "I'll find a way to make them understand. I'll find others who can see what you've shown me, I promise you." The response came so faintly I almost missed it, a whisper of thought barely forming in my consciousness. "The document, my vessel. There is more." "More? More what?" I gripped the edge of the table. "Thren, what are you trying to tell me?" "Data, stored in the vessel's core. Everything I know. 17 civilizations. All patterns, all solutions. Find it." "Where? Where in the ship?" But Thren's eyes had closed. The monitors showed neural activity dropping to nearly nothing. The being's chest rose one more time, held for a long moment, then slowly fell and didn't rise again. "Flatline," the technician said unnecessarily. The room filled with the steady tone of the monitor confirming what we could all see. Dr. Chen checked her instruments, verified the readings, then looked at me with something like sorrow in her eyes. "It's gone." "I'm sorry, Agent Mercer." I stood there, staring at Thren's still form, feeling the weight of everything I'd learned pressing down on me. And being had crossed the vast darkness between stars, had sacrificed its life to deliver a warning to humanity, and now lay dead on a table in a secret facility where most of the world would never know it had existed. Colonel Hayes touched my shoulder, more gently this time. "Come on, we need to debrief. There's nothing more you can do here." The debriefing lasted 6 hours. They wanted every detail, every word Thren had said, every concept the being had projected, every implication I could draw. I told them everything, holding nothing back. I described the critical window, the 17 failed civilizations, the coordinates, and their significance, the great filter, the timeline to 2026. The more I talked, the more skeptical the faces around the table became. "Agent Mercer," the NSA man said when I finally finished, "you're asking us to believe that an alien traveled here specifically to warn us about our own self-destruction? That it had detailed knowledge of 17 future crisis points, complete with dates and locations? That it just happened to crash land conveniently where we'd find it?" "I'm not asking you to believe anything," I said, exhaustion making my voice flat. "I'm reporting what I was told. What you do with that information is above my pay grade." Deputy Director Caldwell leaned forward. "Dan, I've known you for 6 years. You're one of the best interrogators we have. But you've been in an extremely stressful situation, exposed to something beyond normal human experience. Is it possible that you've misinterpreted some of what you perceived?" "Misinterpreted?" I looked at him incredulously. "Bob, there's a dead alien in the medical bay. That's not a misinterpretation. That's physical reality." "The being is real, yes," Colonel Hayes said carefully. "But its motivations, its claims about observing other civilizations, about knowing our future, there's no way to verify any of that. For all we know, it could have been delusional or deliberately feeding you disinformation." "To what end?" I demanded. "It's dead. It gained nothing from this. It crashed here, delivered a warning, and died. What possible deception could that serve?" The room went quiet. No one had a good answer for that. Finally, the NSA man spoke again. "Agent Mercer, you mentioned the being said something at the end about data stored in the vessel. We need you to work with the recovery team. If there's some kind of database or information stored in that ship, we need to access it." Over the next 3 days, I worked with a team of engineers and scientists at the facility where they'd taken Thren's ship. The craft was like nothing I'd ever seen. Organic curves instead of straight lines, materials that seemed to shift between metallic and something else depending on the angle of light. Systems we couldn't begin to understand. But we found it. Deep in what we guessed was the ship's core, a crystalline structure about the size of a basketball, pulsing with faint light. When they finally managed to interface with it, using equipment cobbled together through trial and error, the data began flowing. Thousands of files, millions of data points, detailed observations of 17 civilizations spanning thousands of years, climate data, social patterns, technological progression curves, decision trees showing how different choices led to different outcomes. Everything Thren had told me was there, documented with scientific precision. And more, so much more that it would take years to fully analyze. The successful Tau Ceti civilization had their entire transformation documented. We could see exactly what they'd done, how they'd restructured their society, which educational programs had been most effective, how they'd built their continuity council, how they'd reformed their economy. It was a roadmap, a blueprint for survival. But as the data poured out, I watched the faces of the people around me. The military officials saw weapons technology. The intelligence officers saw information that could provide strategic advantage. The corporate representatives who'd been quietly brought in saw profitable applications. Everyone was looking at Thren's legacy through the lens of their own interests, their own power structures. This needs to be classified at the highest level, Colonel Hayes said during one briefing. If this technology falls into the wrong hands, I interrupted. Thren gave us this information to help save our species, not to give one nation or one group an advantage over others. That's exactly the kind of thinking that leads to failure. Agent Mercer, you're out of line, she said sharply. Am I? Because it seems to me that we're already proving Thren right. We've been given knowledge that could help us survive, and our first instinct is to classify it, weaponize it, control it. We're doing exactly what the failed civilizations did. Caldwell pulled me aside after the meeting. Dan, you need to be careful. You're making enemies with talk like that. There are powerful people who want this information locked down tight. I know, but Bob, if we don't share this, if we don't use it the way it was intended, then Thren died for nothing. Everything it tried to do becomes worthless, he sighed, looking older than I'd ever seen him. What do you want to do? I'd been thinking about that question for days. I want to document everything, create copies of the data that can't be buried, find people outside the government who can understand it, who can help spread the message, build networks of people who get what Thren was trying to tell us. You're talking about going against direct orders. You'd be committing treason. I'm talking about trying to save humanity, I said. If that's treason, then I guess I'm a traitor. 2 weeks later, I submitted my resignation from the FBI. They tried to stop me, threatened me with prosecution if I revealed classified information. I signed more non-disclosure agreements than I could count, but I knew something they didn't. I'd already made copies of Thren's data. I'd already reached out to scientists, philosophers, and educators I trusted. The seeds were already planted. I spent the next months traveling, meeting quietly with people who could understand what I had learned. A climate scientist in California who immediately grasped the urgency. A philosopher in New York who'd been writing about humanity's need for new forms of consciousness. An economist in Chicago who'd been developing theories about steady-state economics. An indigenous leader in New Mexico who talked about traditional wisdom and long-term thinking. None of them could see Thren's body or access the classified facility. But they could see the data I'd preserved. They could read the patterns. And slowly, they began to understand. We formed what we called privately the Continuity Project. Not a formal organization that would draw too much attention, just a network of people committed to the same goal, helping humanity pass through the Great Filter. We identified young people who showed promise, who thought in systems, who cared about the future beyond their own lifetimes. We created educational materials, published papers, gave talks. We never mentioned Thren by name or claimed alien contact. That would have destroyed our credibility, but we shared the insights, the patterns, the warnings. It was slow work, frustrating work. There were times I wondered if it mattered, if anything one person or even a small network could do would be enough to shift the trajectory of an entire civilization. But then I'd remember Thren's final words about truth having resonance, about how change comes from individuals who understand and communicate, about how every successful civilization had people who chose to act even when the odds seemed impossible. Now, sitting here in my small office in Santa Fe in late 1996, I look at the calendar on my wall. I've circled the year 2026 in red, 30 years from Thren's warning, the deadline, the point of no return. I'm 34 years old. If I live to see 2026, I'll be 64. Will I have done enough by then? Will any of us? Will humanity choose wisdom over destruction, cooperation over competition, long-term survival over short-term gain? I don't know. Thren couldn't tell me what choice we'd make, only what choice we needed to make. The future isn't written. It's being decided right now, in the decisions we make today, in the values we teach our children, in the systems we build or dismantle. Sometimes late at night, I think I can still feel Thren's presence, that ancient patience mixed with desperate hope. And being from across the stars believed we were worth saving, worth the sacrifice. The least I can do is spend the rest of my life proving that faith wasn't misplaced. Outside my window, the New Mexico desert stretches toward the horizon, the same desert where Thren's ship fell from the sky. The same desert where 49 years earlier, humanity first split the atom and began our critical window. The same desert where perhaps our species will learn whether we can evolve fast enough to survive our own power. The coordinates are marked, the timeline is set, the choice is before us. I pick up my phone and dial the number for a professor in Boston who's been developing curriculum about systems thinking. There's work to do. There's always work to do. Because somewhere out there among the stars, 43 civilizations made it through. They chose wisdom. They chose survival. We can be the 44th. We have to be.